Hello and welcome to Book Peeker. This time I'm reviewing a fiction book which is absolutely gorgeous. So stay tuned. I've actually read a few nonfiction books, 7 or 8 of them, and they're kind of half finished, not really all the way through. Maybe 4 or 5 chapters in one about negotiation, another one about design, something else about how to be great at business or something, or leadership or whatever it is. So all those books that I pick up because I'm traveling to an airport and I see a nice book and I pick it up, read 50, 70 pages, and then I kind of move on to something else, or it lies in my bag or something like that. But anyway, I'm going to complete some of them. They're nice books. Some of them are quite nice. I'm going to complete them as well and then put the reviews here. Actually, that's one of the reasons I started this channel, so that I could actually complete all these books. It gives me a bit of a commitment to all of you, because you're going to come here and watch this and kind of put your comments down and like this and say all kinds of awesome things about it. But anyway, let's move on to this book. This is called, actually, first, let me get to the story of how I discovered this book. So I was in Chandigarh and I was in the mind to, kind of relax a little bit, kick back and kind of just enjoy a kind of story, really, right? So rather than pick up the typical nonfiction book, which is really about learning and expanding your mind and that kind of stuff that I really like doing from time to time, but this time it was like just a different mood, which I actually enjoyed quite a lot, and it's got me to read this beautiful book, and I think reopened a doorway for me, which I'd kind of left behind for some reason. I used to love to read as a kid, and primarily in fiction books, and the reason was it transports you into these different worlds, and it kind of makes you think about different things, right? So it's really important to keep doing that, but somehow of late I have been reading a lot of nonfiction and nonfiction. But anyway, let's come back to the story. So I was in Chandigarh in the mood to kind of find a story and a storybook essentially, and then I went to Bahari Sons, which also has a blue tokai inside it, a coffee shop and a bookshop. That's such a fantastic combination, irresistible. So they have a similar one in Delhi, which I have visited fairly often, very frequently. And so when I saw this, I immediately jumped at the opportunity. I went there, had a coffee, and then I walked into the bookstore and started looking around, and there was a distinguished looking middle-aged kind of lady with white hair and stuff, and she kind of asked me, beta, can I help you and stuff. And it was really nice to meet somebody like that at a bookshop who kind of actually cares about books and reading books, and she clearly had read a lot of the books that were at the bookstore. I mean, she kind of knew about the stories, she knew about the authors and stuff like that. So it was really nice to actually run into somebody like that. So it's really nice to meet people like that, because there's a sense of camaraderie, because both two book lovers are there, people who like reading fiction books and stuff like that. And this happened to be the book owner. So and yet she kind of came across as a book lover. So typically a lot of book store kind of people will not really be the owners themselves. There'll be some employees, and while some of them can be knowledgeable about the books, but typically not a lot of them give off the vibe of kind of really being deep book lovers. So anyway, the idea was that I was looking for something literary and entertaining at the same time. So, and there were a bunch of books, authors that I'd already read. So one was Sally Rooney, one was some of these Murakami. I think there was a book that I haven't read which was lying there, but I wanted to try something new. So there were these kind of factors that I started looking at some of these books that were bestsellers and new on the shelves and things like that. So this lady kind of started quizzing me about what I really wanted, and somehow we got talking about Orhan Pamuk. I think she brought it up, and she said, you enjoy, because she was kind of trying to get at what I really wanted, and she said, you like Orhan Pamuk? So I said, yes, absolutely. That's My Name is Red is one of my favorite books. So she said, oh, if you like that book, here's this book. You will love this, right? And she gave me The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida. It's by a Sri Lankan author called Shehan Karunatilak. And so it fit 3 or 4 different criteria for me, because it was a new author. It was also a global author, like not from the UK or the US or developed markets. This was a Sri Lankan author. So I enjoy reading authors from all over the world, because different cultures, different parts of the world, it brings you new characters, new insights. So I wanted to read somebody from not quite the established parts of the world, like the US or the UK. So this was Sri Lanka. He was a new author that I hadn't heard of, and also I wanted something that was a bit of a crime fiction kind of thriller, along with not really kind of a cheap one, but something that was literary, right? Now, this seems like a really particular list, but somehow this book kind of actually fits right in the middle of it. So, and it so happens that it's won the Booker Prize last year in 2022. So I got down. The fact that it had won the Booker kind of made me a little bit cautious, because I was like, sometimes these books can tend to be a bit, heavy, ponderous, and sometimes they can come across as being a little bit pretentious or a little bit difficult to access. So I've tried a couple of Booker Prize books earlier in the past, and I think they just kind of got really difficult to kind of plod through and stuff. So I was a little bit skeptical, but when I read, I just picked up a random page and I read through it. It was very light and kind of easy to read and kind of very interesting. And so I started this book, and let me quickly get on to what this book is about. So it's a book that's set in Sri Lanka during the time of the violence in the 80s, where there was the LTT, the JVP, the Indian peacekeeping force had gone over there. There was so much violence, so much militancy, so much destruction, and quite a disturbed time for that country. And I remember actually kind of having a memory of that time, because we'd see these photographs on newspapers and also in some of these current affairs magazines, which were quite disturbing. Obviously, everything that was happening in Sri Lanka also had a big impact in India, as we know. Rajiv Gandhi got assassinated in that connection and stuff like that. So it's set in that world, which is quite disturbing as a background. But then it's also a cast of characters that lives in Colombo, and it's the main kind of character who's the protagonist in this book, and two of his friends, a lover, a gay lover, a friend, a female friend. They all live in the same flat. And it's a Colombo which is kind of elitist Colombo, where people are kind of a little bit disconnected from the rest of Sri Lanka. And then there's of course a cast of other characters involved in the war, involved in the violence. And here the main protagonist is actually a photographer who takes essentially photographs of the conflict. So the book opens with this protagonist finding that he's dead. And I'm not giving away anything, because that's really the starting premise of the book. That's how it starts. That basically this character ends up, and he realizes, kind of when the book opens, you realize that he's essentially dead and he's in purgatory. He's in some kind of like intermediate stage, and he has to be processed into the next stage and stuff like that. But for 7 moons, he decides to kind of stay back in the in between, because that in between you can observe the world that you've just come from. And there's a whole kind of world that he builds around Colombo, around Sri Lanka, which is occupied not just by the residents of the regular residents, the normal people, but also the various spirits that inhabit it, that have died. And it's kind of a brilliant metaphor, I think, for all the violence that happened, all the people who died, the suicides that happened, the people that were subjected to oppression and brutality, and how they died and stuff like that. So there's all these ghosts that inhabit that entire world. I'm not going to say more. I haven't given anything away, actually. It's just the setting of the place. But if you read the book, you'll obviously meet the individual characters. It's just an absolutely amazing book, that's so beautifully crafted, because it's really a metaphor of a tale. It's talking about the violence that happened in Sri Lanka. It's also talking about the reflections that, the emotional side of things for the dead people, the unsaid things, the things that they couldn't resolve, and the things that essentially became longings. Even after the people were dead, there were longings left, right? And so the story really here is the thriller. You have to discover, basically, the protagonist has to discover who murdered him. And that's really the structure of the book. And that's really the story as it goes along. But the background is really the main narrative, because you look at what's going on in the country, you look at the different characters that are involved in it. So it's kind of meshed really well. But added to that is this dimension of this other world, the next world, where people who are caught in the in-between, or choose to be in the in-between, rather than be processed and move on to the next step, are kind of inhabiting that world and kind of cohabiting that space, essentially, with the regular people that are alive. And that really makes it a really, really interesting book to read. So it's entertaining at one level, but very, very disturbing, very emotional at another level. So, and that juxtaposition is what kind of makes it very, very unique, I feel. It's really something that you enjoy reading. So I think the author has done a absolutely brilliant job of telling a story that, while it talks about something greater, kind of entertains the reader as he goes along. And I think most great books tend to do this, that they operate at different levels. One is that you kind of read the story and you're entertained by the plot and the story and what happens and the characters and so on and so forth, but also there is a narrative behind it which kind of elevates it another level. And so that's really what this book does, and those are the best kind of books. You really enjoy the story, but it stays with you for a really long time because the message in it kind of stays really, really long. And towards the end of the book, once the mystery is resolved, and it's absolutely beautiful. By the way, this is one book where I was never tempted to go forward and kind of find out who murdered the protagonist, right? Because it's just that the story kind of compels you to kind of let the characters kind of discover it with you. And that's very rare, because typically in a murder mystery all you want to know is who did it, right? And it's not like that, because it's kind of so well crafted, so well put together, that you really want to go on this journey. And at the end, it's kind of almost, it's not immaterial, of course, but it's almost not that important, because the story is so much better than actually the plot. And that's something that I really loved. It's also, the character is gay, the protagonist is gay, and that kind of comes with its own set of issues in the 80s, back in the 80s in Sri Lanka. And so that's also part of the entire milieu. He has a troubled relationship with his father and so on and so forth. So it's a really, really interesting emotional story told in the guise of a beautiful murder mystery, which is very, very entertaining and quite light at that level, but then there's this deep violence behind it. So and then beyond that, there's a layer of literary understanding of the world. And by the way, towards the end of the book is exceedingly tragic, very, very literary, but exceedingly tragic, because it's uncovering some very deep and uncomfortable truths, or not really uncomfortable, but some very tragic and deeply sad truths about loss, about impermanence, about transience, about longing, about the whole struggle of life. And it includes not just human beings, by the way, but also animals, which is something that I personally love, because it's this whole notion of looking only at life from the perspective of the human condition. But here he kind of looks at it even beyond that. I think you'll get what I mean if you kind of read, if you get to the end of this book and read it. It's very, very deeply saddening at the end, and still hopeful. So this is, a book of paradoxes, a book of juxtapositions. In the end, it's not a sad book. It's a happy book at some level, which is strange to say because the protagonist dies in the first few pages, and somehow you still feel elevated by the end of it. You still feel like you've discovered something about life. So absolutely recommend it very, very strongly. If you are a book lover, if you like reading fiction, if you like reading books in general, this is one book I suggest you don't miss. And I've decided to, I've decided upon an endeavor, actually, which is that I've read the Booker Prize winning book of 2022. Now I'm going to go back in reverse chronological order and start reading all the Booker Prize books. So the next one will be 2021. I haven't found out which that one is yet, but I'm going to order it. Order a physical copy. All of these will be physical copies. Order a physical copy, or go to a bookshop and pick up a physical copy, and then read it and put the review down here. I'm sorry, it was probably a little bit of a scattered review, because I'm not, an experienced, seasoned critic. Although I should be, I've studied literature, but I should know how to, critique things a little bit better than this. But if you look at it from just a reader's perspective, really, really deeply engaging, deeply moving, and deeply entertaining book. So hope you enjoyed that review. Hope you enjoy the book when you read it. Tell me what you think about it, actually. Put it in the comments. And by the way, just for friends, I'm planning to start a book club, because I think it's important to kind of get people, like-minded people together, and maybe once a quarter meet somewhere and kind of discuss a book. And this kind of book would just make it a really entertaining evening to discuss, to talk about. So, let's get that book club going. Whoever's kind of in the vicinity. Actually, even if you're not in the city, these days people travel a lot. We should probably try and meet up somewhere in one location, kind of discuss one book and make a holiday out of it. But anyway, thanks for listening. Put your comments down in the comments box below, and watch out for the other reviews, both for the non-fiction books that I have yet to finish, but I'm close to finishing, and also for the Booker Prize winners and other books that I've resolved, as usual, to read more. and I shall try to live up to that promise. Bye bye.